We're live.
Hello, this is George.
I am Bonnie. And it's Tuesday.
And this is the Tiny Road to Yeshua. February 16th.
Can't believe it's
7
February
o'clock.
16th.
Already halfway through February.
Yes, isn't it?
Okay. I am going to start out with something a little different. I never do that, do I?
No.
But
Yeah, you do.
I woke up at 5:02 Saturday, and this thought went through my head. Usually it just goes in one, out the other, but this one kind of stuck. Steal my pen.
Sorry.
And I woke up and I went into the office and I started making little notches on a piece of paper. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Probably backwards, but yeah.
Little notches. There's 40 across and 20 rows. That's what these are. And for some reason I started saying, they represent people. And if you add those people to get 2 billion, each one of these lines represent 2,500,000 people. Now, I made more lines on both sides of that paper to represent 8 billion people. Now, my brother George over here says, I think he told me that that's how many people are in the world right now that just got over 8 billion.
Hey, Rich.
Okay, now if we take this and think about it, this is what the world consists of, 8 billion people.
Hey, Rhonda.
8 billion. Now these two sheets over here represent 6 billion, and those are people of different religions, atheists, the cult. Everybody is in that 6 billion people. Now, if you take this with it, that represents everybody. This right here are the 2 billion people. Who believe in a name that's not even 400 years old. Think about it. See the line on this side of the paper? It says under that line, these 2,500,000, and I think that's a high number, represent the 2,500,000 people who follow Yeshua. Not only follow him, but they are the people who believe, trust, and follow him. And when he states, when he talked and said, in my name, he only had one name. So now my sweetheart's going to read something that we've read many times, we've stated many times, but I want her to read them today.
Are you going to give the verses? Yeah, me too.
Matthew 7, or Netanyahu 7, 14 and 15, no, 13 and 14, and 7, 22 and 23. I want you to concentrate when she reads.
Go in through the narrow gate, for the gate that leads to destruction is wide, and the road broad, and many travel it. But it is the narrow gate and the hard road that leads to life, and only a few find it. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we expel demons in your name? Didn't we perform many miracles in your name? Then I will tell them to their faces, I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness.
Think about it. These 8 billion notches is what that represents. The wide road. Think how narrow and how small a gate. this road will have to be. That's what I woke up to on Saturday morning at 5:02. Anyway, the study this week has been one of the hardest and most rewarding for me. And you ask her, I've changed it probably half a dozen times. Added to, took away, put scriptures in, took scriptures out. See, when my sweetheart and I went over the topic talk about Wednesday, I realized how confusing it sounded at first. And what did we really want to do? We really wanted to make Revelation 2 and 3 become more clear. And that's what we're going to try to do. Can't always do what I want to do, but that's what I'm going to try to do. I wrote all about Revelation 2, 1 through 7, and then I had to write this part. And I even got first wrote here because it was the first time I had to rearrange everything. But anyway, the Messianic community. We believe John's letter to each Messianic community was written while he was exiled on the island of Patmos. Now, each one of these communities was on a road. And that was a major Roman route. You could call that route a road connecting each town as a trade route in Asia for the Roman Empire. Now, if you look at a map from the island of Patmos, you go about 50 miles east by the sea to a town called Ephesus. Now, if you are in Ephesus, you have to go north to Pergamum. No, I'm sorry. Smyrna. These words. Have to go north to Smyrna. Keep going north to Pergamum. Then a little southeast to Thyatira. Then due south to Sardis, Philadelphia, and last is Laodicea. That's the way they're written about in in Revelations 2 and 3. What's so interesting is that route, it is the same lineup for each chapter in Revelation 2 and 3 that was the route for the trade for the Roman Empire. So the messenger could leave the island of Patmos with 7 letters of instruction from John and make one trip on the road to each town and visit each Messianic community along the way.
Hey, Dallas.
We will see not all the instructions were pleasant. But you can't just take my word for any of this, can you? The first Messianic community that starts the letter route of is Ephesus. There's Ephesus. Before starting in the Revelation 2, we're going to go to Acts 19, and my sweetie's going to read from 23 to 32.
It was at this time that a major uproar, we said, arose concerning the way. There was a silversmith named Demetrius who manufactured from silver objects connected with the worship of the goddess Artemis. And he provided no small amount of work for the craftsmen. He called a meeting of them and of those engaged in similar trades and said, "Men, you understand that this line of business provides us our living, and you can see and hear for yourselves that not only here in Ephesus, but in practically the whole province of Asia, that Paul had convinced and turned away a considerable crowd by saying that man-made gods aren't gods at all. Now the danger is not only that the reputation of our trade will suffer, but that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will come to be taken lightly. It could end up with the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and indeed throughout the whole world, being ignominiously brought down from her divine majesty. Hearing this, they were filled with rage and began bellowing, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Soon the whole city was in an uproar. As one man, the mob rushed into a theater, dragging along Gaius and Artemis. Well, that's not it. Anyway, the other guy. Saul's traveling companions from Macedonia. Saul himself wanted to appear before the crowd, but the Talmud wouldn't let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of his, sent message begging him not to risk entering the theater. Meanwhile, some were shouting one thing and others something else, because the assembly was in complete confusion, and the great majority didn't even know what they were there for.
Okay, don't turn. Okay. She started out by reading chapter 19:23. I want her to go over 23 one more time.
It was at this time that a major uproar arose concerning the way.
This starts out with a disturbance, and it arose concerning the way. Now that's what the Complete Jewish Bible called the movement, the way. So we looked up that same verse in 10 different Bibles, and they all say the way. A couple added a few more descriptive words to it, but they all state the way. The interesting part in that reading is verse 32. Read 32 again.
Meanwhile, some were shouting one thing and others something else, because the assembly was in complete confusion, and the great majority didn't even know why they were there.
32 states, a great majority didn't even know why they were there. Another translation states, most of the people didn't know why they were there. In other words, a riot. Remember a few weeks ago when I stated the riot when Yeshua was standing trial and the people were in confusion? A mob, not really knowing why they were there? They were just participating in a riot. Without any real knowledge why. Sound familiar? Well, this scene in Ephesus seems to be the same type of mob riot. And we read that because we're going from Revelation, and everybody says, "Oh, Revelation is so confusing." We're correlating it back so you can understand about Acts as well. But the first letter starts in that same town which had that riot about what? The way. On the Aegean Sea, they even state that the second letter written was to Smyrna.
Hey, Marcia.
Now, the town Smyrna, and that town was one of the main ports of Asia. For who? The Roman Empire. So the order and the importance to the Roman Empire were running hand in hand. And I've never heard anybody else say that. Never heard anybody else think about that. No preacher I've ever heard said anything like
Hey,
that.
Jim.
But we got to remember, the letters weren't all happy.
No.
And you might say, by looking at the scenarios of each one, you should put two and two together and see the importance of those letters to each Messianic community. Now, why do we actually call these Messianic communities? Think about this. What were each one of Yeshua's followers, his disciples? We know his disciples were all Hebrew, were all Jews. They were Jews who believed in the Messiah, Yeshua. The 12 were Jews. They followed him, listened to him, believed in him and his calling. When Yeshua stated, John 14:6,
Yeshua said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
in that part, he was the way, the truth, and the life. That's what Yeshua stated. And people started to believe that he was their way. Individuals didn't mind being called the way. That was a connection to Yeshua that in reality no one else ever had. At that time. And really since. But people of today take the way for granted. Most believe and are told, if I say these few words, I'm going to heaven when I die. I'm saved. I don't know, haven't ever heard, wouldn't understand if this Yeshua fella stood in front of me. But hey, my preacher said I didn't even need to know his real name if I truly only believed. If you believed in what? If you believed in Fred? Or even Gilligan? Or some other made-up name, right? Well, my thought about that is, I really wouldn't mind being connected to the way. Think about it. Matter of fact, that's one word that would join a biblical society together to Yeshua and no other. He's the only one that said he was the way, the truth, and the life. So if you're connected, if you have a biblical society connected to Yeshua and no other, at that time when the term Christian has lost its drive for a lot of the ways of truth, when you really study the scriptures. Acts 22:3-4, please.
I am a Jew, born of Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city and trained at the feet of Gamaliel in every detail of the Torah of our forefathers. I was a zealot for God, as all of you are today. I persecuted to death the followers of this way, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison.
That's Saul. Paul referred to the movement as what? The way. Now you're going to hear a couple little inserts that we wrote after we wrote what we were going to talk about. Scripture states that each one had an angel. Each one of the towns. Each one of the Messianic communities. Each one of the churches. I don't care what version you read. But I want my honey to read chapter 1, verse 20.
Revelation, right?
Yes, Revelation 1, verse 20.
Here's the secret meaning of the 7 stars you saw in my right hand, and of the seven gold menorahs. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 messianic communities, and the 7 menorahs are the 7 messianic communities.
You might say it's a little difficult or different. I wrote down 3 things about that little saying, and I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying to believe me. Here's what I wrote down. Number 1, Yochanan, or John, the author, is to write letters to angels. If there were really angels, there isn't a practice in any messianic community that I've ever heard of, or in any church, to write letters to angels. Have you ever thought about that? If you believe they were the preachers of these messianic communities or churches, we can't find anywhere that would set a precedent to call your pastor an angel. Number 3, if you look at them as messengers from your community, then why not address them personally and not address the whole community? Those are just 3 things that popped out at me. Okay. Now my honey's going to read Revelation 2, 1 through 7, and I get to take a little break.
To the angel of the messianic community in Ephesus write, here is a message from the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 gold menorahs. I know what you have been doing, how hard you have worked, how you have persevered, and how you can't stand wicked people. So you tested those who call themselves emissaries, but aren't, and you found them to be liars. You are persevering, and you have suffered for my sake without growing weary. But I have this against you. You have lost the love you had at first. Therefore, remember where you were before you fell. Turn from this sin and do what you used to do before. Otherwise, I will come to you and remove your menorah from its place, if you don't turn from your sin. But you have this in your favor. You hate what the Nicolaitans do. I hate it too. Those who have ears, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the Messianic communities. To him winning the victory, I will give the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in God's Gan Eden.
Okay. You heard her read that. Revelations 2, 1 through 7 talks about Ephesus. Ephesus actually sounds like a decent place to attend service. They have, or at the very least, show a form of hard work and perseverance. Praise for its virtues. Some say, and we've heard it preached by some Messianic rabbis, some say the most important Hebrew or Messianic community in all of Asia. What an uplifting feeling that must have been. Yet when we read Acts 19, 17 through 20, 19, 17 through 20.
19. I put on the wrong page, sorry. When all this became known to the residents of Ephesus, fear fell on all of them, Jews and Greeks alike, and the name of the Lord Yeshua came to be held in high regard. Many of those who had earlier made profession of faith now came and admitted publicly their evil deeds, and a considerable number of those who had engaged in occult practices threw their scrolls in a pile and burned them in public. When they calculated the value of the scrolls, it came to 50,000 drachmas. Thus, the message about the Lord continued in a powerful way to grow in influence.
Have you ever thought about 50,000 drachmas? Now, I read it. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've tried to find it. But it says that would be around $2 million in this day and age.
A lot of money.
Now, if you stop and think about it, what were they burning? They were burning the stuff that was opposite of what Yeshua was preaching. We'll get into more than that. What the town had turned into at one time, in Revelation 2:2 says,
I know what you have been doing, how hard you have worked, how you have persevered, and how you can't stand wicked people. So you tested those who called themselves emissaries, but aren't, and you found them to be liars.
It says you can't stand wicked people. You test the emissaries. In other words, the people who claim to be apostles or preachers. And you find some aren't what they make out to be or what they claim to be. Matter of fact, you even come out and call them liars. But it says you have lost the love from your start, what you started with. You're not in the point of growing weary. Why would he state that? Hasn't grown weary. Before they burn that stuff, does it sound like those religious people of that town have become too comfortable since their fall? Since their following of a demon, well, I'll get that. Does it sound like those religious people that down have become comfortable since their fall? And would you say, does that sound like a few churches today? If the preacher says something, well, it must be true, we'll follow it. Well, he went to that college, so he must know what he's talking about. Then you might say this letter gets stern in verse 5.
Therefore, remember where you were before you fell. Turn from this sin and do what you did before. Otherwise, I will come to you and remove your menorah from its place if you don't turn from your sin.
Otherwise, I will come to you and remove your menorah. English versions say lampstand. But to a Messianic synagogue, that would be a menorah. Remove your menorah from its place. Then the stipulation comes that if you don't turn from your sin. Let's think about this. They're told if they don't change their ways, they're going to have their menorah removed in the Messianic community. The word menorah, which is this, we got that when we were in Israel. That's what it looks like. The word menorah comes from the Semitic or Hebrew root meaning to shine. That's what the menorah was supposed to do, to shine. Now, this lady had a brilliant thought when we were discussing it. She said, Therefore, if they have their menorah taken away, then they will be in total darkness. Because the menorah actually means to shine. Now, to me, that was a gripping thing. That was something that I would have never thought of. To have their menorah or something taken away, and you would never have a shine. You'd be in total darkness. That's what it really represents. Okay, now I gotta find out where if you don't turn from your sin. Okay. It says something kind of strange. In your favor, is that what verse 7 says?
If you don't turn, verse 6.
Verse 6. In your favor, you hate what the Nicolaitans do. I hate it too. Did you notice he didn't say, I hate the Nicolaitans? He says, I hate what the Nicolaitans do. And I hate it too. It wasn't the people. It wasn't what, it was what they were doing. Now, another batch of information.
Tidbit.
Another tidbit. That's a good one.
Another tidbit.
Oh, you're so good.
Another tidbit.
So who were the Nicolaitans? It is believed this group came from a deacon, a servant, or a caretaker of some sort, who was actually a proselyte to the Hebrew faith.
Which means they weren't
proselyte
Jewish.
Means they were a Gentile who came to belief in the Hebrew faith and took the rite and all the ceremonial stuff to become a Hebrew, a Jew. So this gentleman, who was a proselyte to the Hebrew faith, it is believed in a community he was faithful to. He started to bring a change in their practice of faith, to follow more of a sexual and idolatry type of worship. Now, this one person kind of brings that into picture. Now, when your person thinks of it, isn't that what some, or you might say quite a few, so-called Christian religions and denominations do today? They worship the statue, the picture. They worship everything. They do things to appease somebody else. They worship everything except Yeshua. Okay. Back to who was the Nicolaitean. There is a belief that it stemmed from the person named in Acts 6, verse 5. And I'm having to read it out of the NIV because in the complete Jewish Bible, the words are atrocious to try to pronounce.
They're not much easier in the
Yes,
NIV.
they're a lot easier in the NIV.
So forgive me from the start. This proposal pleased the whole group. They chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit. Also Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas from Antioch, a convert to Judaism.
A convert to Judaism. Now, this is what they're believing. I wasn't there, so I'm just going by what I've been studying. This is believed to be the same Nicholas who was from Antioch. Nicholas is why they came to be called Nicolaitans. One of the 7 men the disciples put in charge of things like the food. Remember in that verse, they talked about the disciples say, we can't be concerned about the food. Let's get 7 men together and have them worry about the food. Now I wrote, to be in charge of things like the food, and they, the disciples, could concentrate on prayer and the ministering of the word. That's what the Nicolaitans mean. That's what I come up with. Okay. Spread the message around to hear what the Spirit says to the Messianic community or churches. Now read verse 7, please.
Verse 7. Those who have ears, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the Messianic communities. To him winning the victory, I will give the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in God's Gan Eden, or Eden. Garden of Eden.
Okay. Those who win victory. I give the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in God's Eden. God's Gan Eden. Think about it. The paradise of the new garden, and the new heaven and the new earth are just like the Garden of Eden. There's something to think about. Where God, Adonai, the Father, walked himself. He walked with Adam. When we have a new heaven and a new earth, will he be down here walking again with God's Gan Eden, the new garden?
Wow.
When the new heaven and new earth in Gan Eden, and when I wrote that, my first, what a thought. What a picture of true bliss. True faith in the Son of Yeshua. Now here's the interesting part. And maybe even a journey with the great I Am himself. Like who had before. Now, some of the very few who will have that privilege are not, it's the ones on that line. Not all of them, the billions of other people. As far as I am concerned. That's why the gate is so small and the path so thin. That's it for today, but I got one little statement at the end. And I'm going to most likely state it on every time we talk about this. Any one of the Messianic communities, before we leave, I'm going to tell you this. The value of advice cannot be judged by the number of people for or against it. Let me state that again. The value of advice cannot be judged by the number of people for or against it. The only way to be judged is by truth. The value of advice. It doesn't make any difference how important you think you are, what advice you say, how many people absorb it. The value of advice cannot be judged by the number of people for or against it, who like it or don't like it. The value of advice cannot be judged by the number of people for or against it. The only way to be judged is by what? Truth. I don't care what any of the rest of the people say. I don't care how many preachers. I don't care how many evangelists. I don't care how many Sunday school lessons you go to, Bible studies. Only advice. The value of advice cannot be judged by the number of people who like it or don't like it, who are for or against it. The only way to be judged is by truth.
Wow. You have Dallas has a comment.
Dallas has a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He says Nickelodeons believed and said that a person is saved by grace, and therefore it doesn't matter how you live.
I didn't find that, but I believe that you're probably right. That'd be one of the reasons why you can do anything you want.
Yeah.
Just stay off of my blue suede shoes. Isn't that a song?
Truth matters. That's what he said. In bold letters, truth matters. Exclamation point several times. It's true.
But when
That's
I
what
found
you
that, when
said.
I wrote that, when I found that little part of that, and it just fell into place. The value of advice cannot be judged by how many people agree with you or don't agree with you. That's what we say all the time. Don't believe anything I say. The value of advice cannot be judged by the number of people for or against it. The only way to be judged is by truth. You can take that to the bank. I don't know what bank you're going to go to, but anyway,
So, I think
that was 42 minutes. Woo.
And it was only one church.
One
community.
One Messianic community or one church or whatever, however you want to call it. I don't care how you call it. It took me a whole week to come up with that. Well, you have to remember, I'm getting old and not as old as Dallas, but and I'm slow. And it takes me a while, but I love doing it. I love studying. I mean, I get up early every morning study. We're going to keep going with the churches and Messianic communities, however you want to call it.
Study is a search for truth.
That's true. That's why that book back there says
true.
study.
So true. Thanks,
Probably
Dallas.
backwards, you guys. But next week, we're going to go from at least chapter 2, 8 through 11.
Dallas went, ha ha.
No ha ha about it. You're old. Where we talk about Smyrna and maybe Pergamum. Maybe more, maybe Thyatira. I don't know. But this week,
this was pretty intense.
If the rest of them are,
I hope that it's going to make them really look at things different in Revelation than they did before. I
didn't want anybody to believe just because I said it. I want you to believe because you find it. Revelations is a hard one to swallow, but I tell you what, it's quite rewarding when you come up with something off the top of your head. And I know it's easier for me to come off the top of my head than most people, but anyway. Next week.
Marsha agreed, said that was good, Dallas. So that's good, Dallas.
I did all that talking, and Dallas says one little sentence, and she said, that's good, Dallas.
Well, you know how some people are.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for watching
being part of our Tuesday nights.
I hope a bunch of people.
Great session. Thanks, Dallas.
Watch it on YouTube and Facebook and
like it and share it and
even if you don't like me, have somebody share it, send it to somebody. Okay, love you guys. See you next week.
Have an awesome week.
7:00 next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.